Hello, everybody. The topic for
Hello.
today, hi, Joe. Joe's going to be joining me, and any questions you have, just feel free to ask as we go along. And I have a short quiz at the end, so you'll get to test your knowledge. Okay, so today we're going to talk about understanding scientific evidence and the scientific method, and this picture that's on the front page shows you start with observation, and then you follow the arrow down to you form a question, then a hypothesis, then you experiment, analyze your experiment, you make a conclusion. And that's what we'll be talking about. And if your conclusion is not what you hoped, it wasn't specific enough, you might start the whole process again, make a new observation. All right, let's get into more detail. And after this lesson, you'll be able to answer what is scientific evidence, what are the steps in the scientific method, and you'll be able to set up experiments using the scientific method. Now, you don't have to memorize these, but I like a few words in this definition of science. The pursuit and application of knowledge and understanding of the natural and social world following a systematic methodology based on evidence. I like the systematic methodology and evidence. Wikipedia calls science, it says it builds and organizes knowledge in the form of testable explanations and predictions about the universe. So it's not just what we think or feel, it's actually you can test it. So systematic methodology is another word for scientific method. Evidence is objective data, and the empirical evidence is the kind of data that you use in science that is collected using the senses. What we see, hear, touch, feel, smell, taste comes from direct observation. You can measure it. Okay. And that's the kind, empirical evidence is different than non-scientific evidence. Beware of non-scientific evidence. You may have heard of anecdotal evidence, when people tell you stories or a few examples, or this happened to me. You can't use that to prove or disprove a hypothesis. And I found this Latin phrase that I really like that they use in the British Royal Academy of Science. In Latin, it's nullius in verba, and it means take nobody's word for it. You got to prove it with hard evidence. Okay. Couple more definitions, and then we'll get into more of the scientific method. An independent variable and a dependent variable. Independent variable is something that doesn't depend on anything else, any other variable. It's like time, space, density, fluid flow rate are common independent variables. And the dependent variable is the one being studied by changing the independent variable. I'm going to give you some other examples, and we'll talk more about it. So again, you don't have to memorize that. Okay, and a control group, you've probably heard about a control group in like prescription drug studies. This is the group that's not asked to change their behavior, or if it's a prescription drug study, they don't even know that they're the control group, but they're getting a placebo, like a sugar pill with no active ingredients. You've got the group that gets the real medicine and the other group that gets the sugar pill, and then they study and see if there's any difference, what kind of effect the drug has on the people. So it's good to have a control group so you can compare, All right. Experiments test the effects that the independent variable has on the dependent variable, and we're going to give you some examples. So let's say you have fertilizer. The effects of fertilizer on plant growth is an experiment. The amount of fertilizer used is the independent variable. So we're controlling that. And the plant growth is what happens after, and that's dependent, and you're measuring the height of the plant. So we control the independent variable, and the plant growth is just what results. And another example of independent and dependent, the effects of sugar added in coffee. The amount of sugar is what we're doing, and then it's going to change the taste, right?
Right.
Okay. So independent is the amount of sugar, taste is the dependent variable. Okay. Oh, a couple more definitions, I lied. Sample. One piece of data is a sample. Like, you take a single blade of grass out of a field and you measure it. And it doesn't tell you much, does it? It's just one blade of grass.
Right.
Or like, let's say you're doing an experiment with how high a ball bounces, and you're bouncing it one time. That's one single piece of data. Or another experiment you can do, we want to see how tall all the students are in the 4th grade, and we just measure one student. Okay, that's a sample, but we can do better. We're going to, when you have a bigger sample size, you get more information, better data.
Right.
So it's better to have a lot of data, lots of blades of grass if you're studying something about the grass. Bouncing the ball, you know, if you take the ball and bounce it many times and record it, you're going to have a lot more information about how high a ball bounces. You can't just say that from one bounce.
Right.
Measuring the height of many students in the 4th grade, and then you can do an average if that's what you're looking for. Okay. All right. Here's a picture of the scientific method, and the steps. You'll see many different scientific method steps. You might see only 3, you might see 10, but these are the basics. You start with, you make an observation, like, wow, I noticed that this plant is not doing well. Okay, and why isn't it doing well? And then maybe you do a little research about plant growth, and then you formulate a question. What if I gave it more water every day than I have been giving it? Okay, and that's not, we're not ready to do the experiment yet. First, we need a hypothesis. And a hypothesis is a statement like, if I give the plant more water than I am giving it, if I give it an extra cup of water, this plant will grow better. And then you go on to, and then you set up an experiment, you gather data, and then you draw a conclusion, and you see if that's true or not. Now, you and I can guess that it probably is true, unless you're overwatering it.
Yes.
So you see, I'm going to show you this chart. Now, when you get to the end of, you have your hypothesis about watering the plant, it may turn out that your hypothesis was right, and the plant's going to do better, and you're accepting the hypothesis. You might reject the hypothesis. Say, no, that really wasn't true for this plant. So sometimes it gets proven out, sometimes not. All right. And it starts with a question. We're just going to take you through the steps. I'm going to read these. I wonder what will happen if I replace the battery in my car. Will I get better gas mileage? These are just all things that you can study. And or would it help me lose weight faster if I eat more vegetables? Can I get my plants to grow faster if I add fertilizer to my garden? Will brushing my teeth prevent cavities? These are just examples of what you are wondering about. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So then we have to make an educated guess or an answer to the question, which will lead us then to collect data. So instead of just, we're making a statement that we're going to prove or disprove. If I replace the battery in my car, then my car will get better gas mileage. That's what I'm setting out to prove or disprove. If I eat more vegetables, then I will lose weight faster. You see how I'm not asking a question anymore? I'm just like making a statement.
Right.
If I add fertilizer to my garden, then my plants will grow faster. And for that one about brushing your teeth, if I brush my teeth every day, then I will not develop cavities. Okay. We're going to set up an experiment using the second hypothesis about vegetables. So if I eat more vegetables, then I will lose weight faster. Okay, so we have to have a plan to collect data. And
Okay.
I just made a plan that it's just going to be, I'm the one sample size, I'm the sample size of one, which is, as we said, it's not going to give you that much data, but that's my first experiment. Then we're going to refine it and get better after this one. So I'm going to eat the usual amount of vegetables for 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks, a lot of vegetables. And remember, we talked about independent and dependent variables. The amount of vegetables is the independent variable. I'm going to weigh myself every day, and the weight is the dependent variable, so it's what changes. Okay. We're collecting empirical evidence. We're writing down the weight to prove a hypothesis. We're not just using anecdotal evidence. My sister says she knows someone who lost 50 pounds eating lots of vegetables. That's not going to prove our point, is it?
No.
Okay. And I'm going to keep a food log of exactly what I ate each day. Okay. And ideally, I would keep everything else the same in my routine, so I could really compare the first 2 weeks of just my usual food versus the second 2 weeks of lots of vegetables. So I'm going to do the same amount of exercise, sleep, other foods in my diet to make sure that I'm only changing the vegetable consumption. Okay, and then I study and interpret the data and draw a conclusion. Let's say I don't know what that data would show. Let's say I lost a pound from eating lots of vegetables. And my conclusion is when I eat lots of vegetables for 2 weeks, I lose a pound. Okay. And I go back to the hypothesis, eating lots of vegetables will help me lose weight. I proved it.
Okay.
Now, let's say I didn't lose any weight, or I just didn't trust that that was a great experiment. So I want to design a better experiment. So you remember at the beginning, it was like you do an experiment, you draw a conclusion, you go back to the beginning, and you can start the cycle of the scientific method again.
Okay.
So this time, I am going to specify the exact diet I'm going to follow, not just lots of vegetables.
Okay.
And I'm going to have you and all the students at Seeds involved in the study. Larger sample size, better data, and I'm going to take half of them. I'm going to have them do an exact diet that includes a certain large amount of vegetables, and the other group is going to be the control group, and they're not going to change their diet. They're just going to, live.
Okay.
Oh no, sorry. The control group's going to have an exact diet with few vegetables. so you can compare it to lots of vegetables. And I'm going to do more weeks. I'm not just going to do 2 weeks of, it's going to be, instead of, I decided I don't want to do the 2 weeks of somebody eating just normally and then have them eat vegetables for a lot of vegetables for 2 weeks. I'm just going to have a control group and a test group. And we're going to do it, let's say we're going to do the whole thing for 8 weeks to give it a real shot. Okay. And I don't know how this would turn out, but I think this would be a much better experiment, don't you?
Okay. Yes, I do.
Yeah. So more specifics, and you have a control group and more people, longer number of weeks. And then I'm guessing that if you had a healthy diet with lots of vegetables, you probably don't have the room in your day to eat processed foods that people say are bad for you. So that's, but I can't say without doing the experiment or reading somebody else's results, but you know, that was just an idea of how to set up an experiment and then how to improve upon it. Okay. All right. So I have a few quiz questions and then we'll review what we learned.
Okay.
Which step of the scientific method comes immediately after making observations and asking a question? Do we form a conclusion, or perform an experiment, or analyze data, or form a hypothesis?
A form of hypothesis.
Very good. Yep. Because then after you have your hypothesis, then you have the experiment, you collect data, you analyze it, and then you draw your conclusion. Okay. A scientist is performing an experiment to determine if the amount of light that rodents are exposed to, affects their sleep cycle. I keep tapping this and the color changes. She places some rodents in a room with 12 hours of light and 12 hours of darkness, some in a room with 24-hour light and some in 24-hour darkness. What is the independent variable in this experiment? So we got these rodents, these rats. Is it the rodent's sleep cycle, the amount of light, the temperature of the room, or the amount of food given?
Okay, the independent variable is
What the, okay.
It's the rodent's sleep cycle. Oh,
Now that's, go ahead.
Starting to say the amount of light.
Yes, because that's what the experimenter is changing. And then, yes, the amount of light's the independent variable. And the rodent sleep cycle is what they're studying, and that's going to change. They're seeing if that changes with the light. The temperature of the room, no. The amount of food given, no. You're right. The amount of light. Okay. Amount of light is the independent variable. It is what is being manipulated by the experimenter. Choice A, the rodent sleep cycle, is the dependent variable. It's affected by the independent variable. And then they said C and D are variables that should be kept constant across the experimental groups. So they weren't fooling with the temperature of the room or the amount of food given, only the amount of light.
Right.
Okay. All right. Good. All right. What is the last step of the scientific method? Is it A, performing an experiment, or analyzing data, or forming a conclusion, or making observations?
But the last step is forming a conclusion.
Excellent. Okay, it can only be done after all the other steps have been done. And you gather evidence and okay. And if the data is inconclusive, you can do more experiments or you can form a new hypothesis.
Okay.
All right, we're almost done. We have one more question, and this is a what's wrong with this experiment question. Battery companies make impressive claims about how long their batteries will last. A student decided to test the running time of different batteries to determine which battery lasts the longest. The student tested 6 different batteries, 4 were brand name and 2 were generic, using flashlights. The results show that the battery referred to as name brand A lasted the longest, with 101 hours of runtime. So we look at this chart and we see they have all these different flashlights, right? We got Gear Light, Surefire, Mag Light,
Right.
Bright Star, Surefire, Bright Star. Then they have, oh, I guess they used Surefire a couple times and Bright Star a couple times, but they're all different and different batteries. And then they're saying, well, looks like name brand A is the best battery because look how long it ran.
Okay.
Now, would you think this was reliable, the way they did their test?
No, I wouldn't, because I would think they would have to use the same light on every battery.
Yes, exactly. That's the problem. So that has to stay consistent, and then every battery. Yep. So that was the answer.
Okay.
It was the same flashlight should have been used to test each battery, D.
Okay.
And that is because what needs to change? Okay, yeah, we're just reiterating this. The different batteries and their battery life are being studied, not the flashlight, right?
Right.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So, what have we learned today? We learned about the scientific method and designing experiments. We learned about independent and dependent variables and control groups. And the independent and dependent variables, there are probably some good YouTube videos that explain it more and do some more review on that, because that's kind of a confusing topic, I find.
Okay.
So, but I hope that helps you.
It did.
Good. All right. Thanks.